Detroit Spinners and working my way back to you on Wycombe Sound. It's Bob with you through until 1 o'clock this afternoon. Now, I'm very pleased to say that joining me for one of our regular catch-ups and possibly as well, sadly, our last catch-up is the head of Wycombe High, Sharon Cromie, because for those who don't know, Sharon will be retiring from the position. It's a little while yet, Sharon, so the 31st of August is your official last day.
That's correct, yes.
Yes.
The end
So
of
so I,
term.
w- I would imagine that there's quite a lot of sadness, but also maybe a little bit of excitement as well.
Yes, well, I'll have completed almost 14 years of leading the high school by that stage. So I think it's inevitable there's some sadness, as you say, Bob. But yes, still a sense of excitement and anticipation for the next chapter, whatever that might be.
Yes. Okay. I was going to come on to that a little bit later on. So we'll leave that as a little tease for now. You and I have obviously talked a lot about COVID over the last few years. Very much, I think, in society generally, there is now a feeling of, oh well, it's over and we're back to normal. Is that the case in schools, or are there still things that actually that are going on that are different from before COVID?
Um, no, things are getting back to a stronger sense of normality. So, we don't have bubbles and one-way systems and sanitization stations, etc. All the things that we've forgotten about because things move on. But we're still cautious, personal hygiene, washing hands, taking care if one is sneezing or coughing is still important. But all those restrictions have gone, and the latest government changes, of course, mean that self-isolation rules have changed quite dramatically, haven't they? So for students at school and pupils at school, if they have a high temperature, they have to stay away and then they can come back when they feel well. If they take a test and that test is positive, then they remain away for 3 days. But of course, there is no expectation to test or any need to test as long as people are careful about the temperature. So really quite a change. What hasn't changed is transmission. So we are still seeing quite a lot of people getting COVID and being quite debilitated by it in some instances, like a bad cold or flu-like symptoms. So the transmission, particularly before the Easter break, was very high. And I know that isn't just unique to Wycombe High School. My colleagues across Buckinghamshire and indeed nationally were reporting that as well. So that causes a little bit of disruption in schools. Teachers get it as well. Supply and cover can be quite high, and there can be disruption in lessons if there are lots of children absent. So not completely back to normal, but a very strong sense that we're getting there.
And what about your A-level students? Because clearly they are now about to take their exams, and I'm highlighting them particularly because I think, well, obviously a couple of years ago with their GCSEs, those didn't happen. So actually, it must be slightly more nerve-wracking for them in that they haven't actually really been through this situation before.
No, absolutely, Bob. So our year 13, our A-level students in particular, they didn't sit GCSEs. So this is their first set of public examinations, their first experience, other than internal exams and mocks, of actually sitting examinations in a very, very formal context. And of course, the stakes are high for them, aren't they? Because their next steps rely on the results of these exams. So our hearts go out to them. We do feel for them. That said, they are to be absolutely commended for how resilient they are being, how determined they are being, and how they're absolutely giving it their all. So the mocks that they did in school, they took really seriously. It was very clear from those results that they kept up with their work, that they kept working through, as we say, through the COVID years, and we are expecting great things for them. But yes, there's inevitability about exam stress, situational stress in any part of life is normal and actually quite good. It gets the chemicals in the body working and gives them that burst of adrenaline that they need to get through a short-term period of stress.
Yes, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. That actually, in some ways, those nerves, so as long as they don't overwhelm you, those nerves actually do help
Yeah.
your performance on the day.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, as a generation, this age group, I think, are really to be commended. I know they didn't sit their GCSEs, but and I've said it to you before, Bob, the skill set that they learned and they demonstrated throughout 2+ years of COVID is phenomenal, and I think any employer or university will be really grateful and pleased to get them, because they are very determined, very resilient, and they really know what they want, and they want to live life because they had it curtailed for so long.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And I think it's so important as well to remember that. And actually now it's quite easy for us to just sort of start to take things for granted again. And we need to remember that actually a couple of years ago we would have been so pleased to be doing some of the things that we're now allowed to do. And I think that's a really important message to actually get from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't that long ago that we could only mix outside in small groups of six in freezing cold weather, and we were delighted to do so.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Which brings me nicely on, or maybe slightly depressingly on, to some of the events that have been taking place in Westminster, partly a couple of years ago that are only recently coming out, and also partly that have actually been happening in the chamber. I spoke to Steve Baker the other day, and said to him, well, sometimes your head must be in your hands about some of the things that our politicians get up to. And I would imagine that actually that's very much the same when you're a head teacher, that you're thinking that actually these people are meant to be leading the country, and that we're telling our young people that maybe these are people that they should be looking up to. And then actually some of the conduct must really just I'm holding my head in my hands slightly now. Just make you hold your head in your hands.
Yes, well, I guess in every aspect of life, these things happen, don't they? We spend a long time in schools as school leaders and teachers, teaching young people core values. We teach them, tolerance, mutual respect. We teach them the difference between right and wrong, and we are trying to support them to take their place in society, to role model all of those values. So yes, you're absolutely right. When any individual in any aspect of the commercial world or the public sector falls short, it is, you think, you must have gone to school, you must have learnt these things at school as well, and within your own families. But I guess human beings often make mistakes, but those who are in high profile public roles are under particular scrutiny, aren't they? And that means they have to be very strong ambassadors for the core values that they want, not just for the public sector they may represent, but for the nation. And it's quite hard to believe that someone would sit in the Houses of Parliament watching inappropriate material on a phone. If that was a child in a school, I'm quite sure that parents would expect us to talk to that child, show them their ways, and when it impacts other people, for sanctions to be put in place. So it is quite extraordinary. And of course, these things are around us, as we've seen over the last few years. We've had the Me Too movement. We've also had Everyone's Invited, with the female voice speaking up about sexual violence and harassment in society. So I guess the good thing is that we are all more aware of these things. We are more aware of what is inappropriate, and crucially for me, that we have people who are willing to call it out and challenge it.
It must be quite a difficult road to sort of to walk, actually, when you are, say, the head of a girls' school, between actually educating girls about some of the less pleasant aspects of society, and also at the same time not necessarily panicking them and worrying them. And again, I'm speaking partly as thinking about my daughter, that actually it can be quite tricky, and she can come sometimes to me and say, oh dad, I'm really worried about this because I've heard about it. And it's a really fine line that sometimes we have to walk as parents, and I'm sure that you have to walk as an educator.
Yes, you do, but you have to give people the facts.
Yeah.
In an age-appropriate manner. So a PSHE, the personal social health education in schools, is very carefully constructed and designed to be age-appropriate. And you revisit it as well, because what you take away from a discussion on a certain topic when you're aged 11 or 12 will be very different from what you hear and contribute when you're aged 17 and 18. So you have to construct it, as I say, in an age-appropriate way, but spiral it and revisit it as well, to go deeper and more thoroughly. And yes, you do not want to terrify people. So it is important to be absolutely factual, to give those facts at, as I said, an age-appropriate time and an age appropriate manner, and just to be open and have discussion. But crucially, this isn't just about girls, Bob. This is about boys, girls, and however anyone might identify, actually, so that everyone comes to the table and understands what is basic human decency and how to treat one another. Bullying in any form is inappropriate and unacceptable. So to sexually be violent towards someone or to harass someone is, also very inappropriate. So it's important that everybody comes to the table. So the PSHE provision at Wycombe High School is highly regarded not just by our students, but by other schools in the county and nationally. And we have done it even before it became statutory, as most state schools have done for decades upon decades upon decades. And I'm now delighted to see that the independent sector is starting to introduce it in their schools. And that in itself is quite astonishing for me, that quite a large number of students in our schools in the UK from a different sector from mine perhaps may not have had the same excellent provision in terms of PSHE as the state sector has had. So it takes everybody at the table.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think it is so important, and I think so often things are aimed at girls and at women when actually a lot of the conversation, actually almost the majority of the conversation, should be being aimed maybe at boys and at men, and just teaching them actually that no, this isn't right.
Yeah.
And that when we're seeing sexism, and when you're maybe, if your son is with their friends or whatever, and they're maybe saying a few things that are a little bit inappropriate, that actually you call it out then, because that is the time when those thoughts first actually possibly occur, and they can lead to really terrible things in the future. It's the time to actually to act is at source. And I think it's very important that actually that yes, that boys and young men are taught that there are certain things that just aren't acceptable in society today.
Yeah, absolutely. So it takes us all to be working together, and for that mutual respect to be there, for that to happen. And, nothing makes me more pleased. We're developing young women in our school to be leaders of the future, to lead society, to be confident, self-assured, with core values, and capable of achieving what they want to achieve. And they are, I hope, feminists, and that they will champion the next generation of women as well. But nothing makes me more pleased when I hear young men also identify as feminists. For me, that means that they understand the challenges that many women have had, continue to have, and that they want to be part of the movement to remove those. Because men have had education for centuries. That is something that is built in their DNA. There was always an expectation that many men were educated when women weren't. And luckily, society is moving forward. And, that school is there now literally for everyone, irrespective of their socioeconomic means as well. And with every decade that passes, progress is made.
Now, I understand that the Education Secretary, Nadim Zahawi, has been writing to schools with regards to a tutoring scheme. I wonder if you have heard from him yet.
Well, I haven't looked into it too much because I've been busy interviewing at school this week. But there is something called the National Tutoring Programme that was launched during the COVID years, with very good intent. So that where there are gaps in learning, schools could access a bank of tutors who they could then allocate to those in most need to plug those gaps, which is a great principle in theory. So we used it last academic year during the COVID restrictions, and we ran it in parallel with our own bespoke programme. So to see which met our needs the best. And under the national tutoring programme at that time, you didn't have any choice over the tutors. They were trying to cater for a range of schools, a range of different needs, a range of children at different levels and qualifications. That's quite a big ask of them. It was partially successful for us, but more successful was our bespoke programme, where we employ former students of Wycombe High School who are undergraduates at some of the best universities in the country. And we train them up. They're familiar with our examinations and our awarding bodies. And they offer a virtual service of one-to-one tutoring for students in our school who need gaps plugged. And it's proving to be very successful, not least because those tutors, those bespoke tutors to us, have a direct relationship with the heads of department, and the head of department monitors the progress and has a direct dialogue with the child and the tutor. So although we may
It's a
not
that's a
appear,
fantastic idea, and must
yeah,
be,
yeah,
that must be lovely for them to then actually still maintain a link with the school.
it is, and that's very much part of our ethos that once you join Wycombe High School, you are forever a Wycombe High School student, and that you want to give back and you want to nurture and hold up and offer opportunity to the next generation, whether that's through tutoring or indeed when you're in employment by work experience, or indeed perhaps maybe you will ultimately employ former Wycombe High School students as well. So it's very much about mentoring, and we have over 3,000 alumni signed up and actively involved internationally. But I'm not quite sure whether I appear or Wycombe High School appears on the Education Secretary's list of people who have not used the National Tutoring Programme, but we do now have flexibility to develop these bespoke programmes. So perhaps we are recognised because we have our bespoke programme. So if you're not on the list, I don't know that it necessarily means that schools aren't doing anything, but I haven't looked into the fine detail to be absolutely clear about that.
And it does sound very impressive, particularly when you add in the bit internationally at the end as well. That really does. That makes it sound amazing.
Well, it does, because the truth of it is, it's great that a lot of students of our school remain living locally, and that is fantastic. But many will move away for different reasons, their jobs, for family reasons, for marriage, for travel, and they settle internationally. So we have students in the United States, in Australia, in Singapore, well, anywhere, any country you name it, we have people doing different things around the world, and it's why, at school we always say, um, a global outlook is everything.
Yes, yeah, of course. And the technology now enables us
Mhm.
to
Yeah, yeah,
chat so easily.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
so yeah, and so just then going back to you and the 14 years that you've spent at Wycombe High, talk to me about some of the changes that you've seen at the school and some of the things that you're proudest of the school achieving during that time.
Wow. Well, when I arrived 14 years ago, we were just starting to think about information technology as something that might be quite useful to education. And we very shortly after that ruled out every child will have a device policy and started integrating the use of IT in every single lesson. And it's hard to believe, looking back, that that just hasn't always been the case. So that was the digital revolution occurred in the first 3 or 4 years and has just grown in strength and actually served us very well when the pandemic hit. So 14, maybe more than 14 years ago, the IT server was in a cupboard next to an IT teacher's desk and working environment. And of course, nowadays we have multiple servers, multiple backup systems, lots in the cloud, and a whole team of professional and excellent IT staff. So that's quite a significant shift and change. And one of the other changes that's quite remarkable is that 14 years ago, teachers used to run almost every aspect of the school in addition to teaching. So it would not have been unusual to have had a mathematics teacher who was also perhaps the finance manager, or a history teacher who was the examinations manager, and teachers of all different subjects leading every aspect of student support and the pastoral elements of the life. And what we've done over the last 14 years is professionalise all these areas so that we employ state registered nurses and mental health experts with degrees in their subjects, or trained social workers to, fulfill many of the jobs that traditionally teachers who were trained to teach but not necessarily trained to meet all of societal needs. So that feels a wonderful change in benefit to teachers, and also in terms of the support that we can offer children and families.
I mean, that sounds like an amazing development, because I
Yeah.
think so often you see just generally in the working world that actually maybe the higher up you go in an organization, the less maybe you do at the thing that you're really good at and that you're a specialist at. And so it's wonderful to actually hear that changes have been made so that actually teachers can get on with teaching.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure many of them would feel that they perhaps still do too many things that aren't so directly related to teaching, but I think the very definition of teaching and what that involves has changed over the decades as well. So it's it's also the pastoral well-being of the child, but it's very importantly, it's about the progress of the child. We want every child, irrespective of their special educational need, their socioeconomic background, their heritage, to achieve at exactly the same level. And that means when you're teaching, you have to be very mindful about progress and be, monitoring that progress and adapting your teaching and changing how you teach and what you teach and when, to reflect those needs. And of course, earlier on in this conversation, we were talking about the challenges, of recent times in public life. Well, all of these things have to be reflected in the classroom as well. So, there has been intensive reform of what teachers teach in certain subjects to reflect the society that we live in.
So when you are then, say, looking back again, just give me a couple of things that you will remember when you've left Wycombe High.
Well, I think we've changed a lot of the facilities. So I think it was a very proud moment when we built a complete new music block and opened it, and had it opened by some visiting royals. Our new AstroTurf for me is a big thing because up until the point we had our own all-weather pitch, we had to rent from the boys' schools, which just seemed so wrong and so out of step with what we were about. So we've also, refurbished the sixth form and made it more university-like. So facilities, changes in education and reform, but I guess most importantly, it's the people that I've met through the years and the 14 years that I've had the pleasure of working with. But crucially for me, it's the students. And in many ways, they haven't changed. They are still the most wonderful, vibrant, enthusiastic young students who leave us as wonderful young women ready to fly. And that's a long-lasting memory that will never leave me. I have Wycombe High School
And
in my core.
yes, indeed, absolutely. And what next then for Sharon Cromie? What's going to happen once you close the doors in July? I know that you're carrying on until the 31st of August, but really for the summer and beyond, what are you hoping to do?
Lots of travel. So I've got lots of plans to go traveling. Um, and I also hope that there will be some part-time work opportunities for me linked to education, but I'm just exploring some of those at the minute. Maybe some school improvement work, some consultancy. So I'm just stepping back from full-time school leadership after a great 14 years, but hopefully there'll be something out there. And if not, then that travel will take over and I'll raise a glass ball when I'm lying on a beach.
Fantastic. Well, you've always been so kind and so good to us, Wickham Sound, coming on regularly and speaking to us. So if you are at a loose end and you fancy coming and doing a bit of presenting, there'll definitely be room for you here.
Oh,
Sharon, thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been absolutely wonderful, and all the very best to you as well.
thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure over the years speaking with you, and I wish you the very best too.